Hello, everyone. I'm Katie Freeman on behalf of Mystery Writers of America. Welcome to the 78th Annual Edgar Award Symposium. Tonight's discussion is with the winners of our special awards, very special awards. Our moderator tonight is Oline Cogdill, and our bookseller is Greenlight Books in Brooklyn, New York. You can learn more about the Edgar Awards by following us on social media using the hashtag Edgars2024 or by visiting the websites mysterywriters.org and edgarawards.com, and I will share those in the chat this evening. A reminder that the Edgar Awards are upcoming and will be live streamed on our YouTube channel on May 1st. And during tonight's discussion, I'll be posting links to our special awardees' books and websites and various other information in the chat. Please feel free and extremely welcome to submit questions in the Q&A box throughout the conversation, and we'll get to them at the end of the hour, towards the end of the hour. I wanted to introduce Oline. Oline H. Cogdill reviews mystery fiction for the Sun Sentinel in Fort Lauderdale Tribune Publishing Wire, Publishers Weekly, and Shelf Awareness. She has been honored with the Raven Award from Mystery Writers of America. Oline continues to be a judge for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize in the Mystery Thriller category. Oline also has an essay on reviewing in the Anthony, Agatha, and Barry award-winning book, How to Write a Mystery, co-edited by Lee Child and Laurie R. King, which I'll be sharing in the chat as well. And Oline, please take it away.
Thank you. And thank everyone for coming tonight. I'm glad to see people here, and this is going to be a great night. I am so delighted to have this opportunity to interview our Grandmasters, Katherine Hall Page, R.L. Stine, and our Ellery Queen winner, honoree Michaela I got that right? Michaela Hamilton.
That's close enough.
Okay. Katherine Hall Page writes the very popular Faith Fairchild novels, as well as a couple of other series. She is the first author to be nominated or win in 4 different Agatha categories: novel, short story, young adult, and nonfiction for her cookbook. She also has been nominated for an Edgar and the Simon & Schuster Mary Higgins Clark Award. Robert Lawrence Stine. Okay, we all know him as R.L. Stine. He is probably the most prolific and best-selling of all children's authors in history. Goosebumps recently celebrated its 30th anniversary, and it has more than 400 million books in print in 32 languages. A new Goosebumps series, House of Shivers, debuted in 2023, with 2 more books coming out this year. The Goosebumps series made R.L. a worldwide publishing celebrity, and he's often also a Jeopardy answer. After a 25-year career in publishing, Michaela Hamilton joined the team at Kensington as editor-in-chief of their Citadel imprint. And that was to strengthen that imprint, to bring in more crime writers and more mystery writers, and also just help Kensington along. She is now executive editor, and her importance in the discovery of new writers and emphasis on publishing traditional mysteries, thrillers, suspense novels, that cannot be underestimated. Thank you for what you do. She also likes her thrillers violent, her cozies amusing, and her beer well chilled, as we all do, right? I like to start these Grandmaster interviews by taking us back to the very beginning of your careers. Katherine, you taught high school for several years, developing a program for adolescents with special emotional needs. You wrote your first novel while living in France with your husband, who was on sabbatical. And that book introduced the world to Faith Fairchild. Why was that the right time for you to start writing?
It was a gift of time, actually, because yes, I had been teaching, and also I had been the head of and developed that program. So teaching, administrating, I'd always been working. And my husband had never taken a sabbatical in all of his years. And he thought, well, I'll take a sabbatical. And I thought, well, if he's taking a sabbatical, that's going to give me this gift of time. And I had always wanted to write this book, not necessarily the way it turned out. But I had that time pressure of the year. I had my son was 2 years old. The French had amazing daycare in Lyon, France. I took him in the morning, and French friends loaned me an actual Underwood old typewriter. And so there was a kind of time pressure, but it was really a delight to be able to have that time and to do it that year. And I didn't write it with the intent of publishing it, but then when we got back, I decided, well, I'm going to try to see if I could get an agent. I saw something that Faith Hamlin of Greenberger had put a little note actually in the Society for Children's Book Writers, and illustrators, looking for manuscripts. And I had originally thought I would write a YA. I wrote to her and said, would you be interested in an adult mystery? And she said, send it along. And, had I but known, she sold it right away, which I had been thinking would be a good way to pay off that loan, because I had just finished doing a doctorate in education, and Harvard wasn't cheap. So I was very happy when Ruth Cavan, legendary editor at St. Martin's, said, yes, okay, The Body in the Belfry it is. And when can we expect the second book? I had no idea that it would be a series, or such a long series.
And a very popular one. Now, RL, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you will, you began writing at age 9 when you found a typewriter in the attic. And you started typing stories and joke books. And that was about the time that you discovered Tales from the Crypt comic books. You wrote dozens of humor books for kids under the name, and I love this, Jovial Bob Stine. And you created a humor book, a humor magazine, I'm sorry. When did you make the switch to more suspense novels?
Oline, you've done my whole act. You've done everything. I know it's an embarrassing story. I never planned to be scary. I was always funny. I wrote joke books. That's all I cared about, was being funny. It's embarrassing because writing scary books wasn't my idea. I was having lunch with Jean Fywell, who's at Macmillan now. She was a publisher at Scholastic, and she arrived at lunch angry. And she said, I'm never working with him again. She had just had a fight with another author who wrote teen horror, who shall remain nameless, Christopher Pike. And she, well, no one's watching, right? It's just us. Come on. And she said, you could write a good teen horror novel. Go home and write a book called Blind Date. I didn't know what she was talking about. What's a teen horror novel? I had no idea. But I was at that point in my career where you don't say no to anything. Say, oh, sure, Jean, no problem. And I ran to the bookstore to see what teen horror was. And I read books by Christopher Pike and Lois Duncan and Diane Ho and Richie Tankersley Cusick. They were all writing teen horror back in the late 80s. And I read them and tried to figure out what I could do that would be a little different. I wrote this book called Blind Date. It came out, it was a #1 bestseller in Publishers Weekly. I thought, wait a minute, what? I'd never been close to that list. And then a year later, Jean asked me to write another one. I wrote another teen thriller called Twisted, #1 bestseller. And I said, forget the funny stuff. I'm going to be scary. I've been scary ever since.
That's a great story. I love that.
It's actually a true one.
It's a true one. It's a true one.
Like that story about finding the typewriter in the attic.
Yeah.
My wife wrote all those stories. Yeah. All those stories in my biography, Jane wrote them all. But I've told them so often, I believe them now. But I showed that autobiography came out, and I showed it to my mother. She was horrified. She said, we didn't have an attic. What are you talking about? We didn't have an attic. So they're mostly made up.
Okay. Michaela, your interest in mysteries, also began in childhood, and you skipped the Nancy Drew mystery series, as I did too. And instead, you went to Mickey Spillane and his Mike Hammer series. And I believe they were your father's copies. They were hidden in the bathroom. What was it about these books that inspired your eventual career in publishing?
Well, I loved Mike Hammer. I loved everything about those books. They were so suspenseful. They were so cool and exciting. And they were, of course, forbidden. So that made me want to read them even more. And it kind of surprised my family members when they asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I said, a nightclub dancer, because that's what the interesting women characters were in Mickey Spillane. So I eventually realized that that was not a viable option, but I did continue reading my father's books, including all of his mysteries. And so he very much shaped my taste in mysteries. When I eventually needed to earn a living, I was looking through the New York Times classified ads, which was what we did in those days before all the internet options that are available now. And I got to the P section and I said, hey, look, there's a job in publishing. They pay people to read manuscripts and write about them. I could do that. And it sounded like fun. So I can't say that I really was motivated to have a publishing career, because in my family, none of the women worked outside the home, and a career was kind of an unknown quantity to me. But I just kept reading books, and I was an English major at college. And I was lucky enough to get a very good entry-level position with a company which sadly does not exist anymore. It was called Stine Day, and they published a wide variety of books, including mysteries. And so I just latched on to mysteries as my favorite genre. And over the years that I've been in publishing, it was an era of mergers and conglomerations. So I worked for really just a few companies, but they kept changing names as they kept merging and acquiring each other. So I was able to have some very nice long-term relationships with authors, and some of them I've published at more than one company. I've been with Kensington for over 20 years, and I'm very happy that we have such a strong mystery program. And I've been able to work with some of my favorite authors from previous incarnations of my career, as well as discovering ones for Kensington. Somebody once said that mysteries are the literary fiction of the commercial fiction world. And it's so true, because there's so much good writing in mysteries. And, you know, the word literary doesn't appeal to everyone, but they do live up to many literary standards. And the cleverness and the thought that goes into mysteries is just always amazing to me. So I feel that I have really been very fortunate to be a bookworm in the mystery field for so many years.
And readers are very fortunate that you are so much. Now, RL, it sounds like you didn't have difficulty getting your first, getting publishers interested in horror for children. After those first two books, was it smooth sailing for you then, or?
It's always been smooth sailing, always. And everything's always been like an accident. I just, I came to New York to write funny novels for adults. And I had to earn a living. I ended up at Scholastic and met, a lot of editors who went on to other places. And then I had a lot of friends who were editors all over New York. And so it's always been, I can't really talk to young authors. I can't talk about our years of rejection and difficulty. It's always just been fun for me.
Okay. Katherine, what was your inspiration for Faith Fairchild? She was a caterer and then became a minister's wife. What was your inspiration, and why do you think readers still gravitate to Faith?
First, I think actually, as we're talking here, we certainly have a lot in common. I never read any Nancy Drews. I started right in with my brother's Sherlock Holmes, and he also had some Agatha Christie. So I sometimes I'm a little embarrassed to tell people, no, I mean, I did read a couple later, after I was doing it. And also the whole, what Aurel was just saying about, I'm also a little bit embarrassed because the first book came out in '89, and it's really been an amazing run and smooth sailing. I didn't have rejection letters. I got offers from 3 different publishers for that first book, and I think it was a kind of a right place, right time. And when you're talking about Faith Fairchild, I think that's part of it, where there were a lot of trailblazer women who had female sleuths of various kinds, Sue Grafton, Marcia Muller, Sarah Paretsky, not necessarily the traditional type mystery that I write, but there was suddenly publishers saying, well, gee, maybe we need to have a few more female sleuths on our list. And I think that's something that was happening in the late '80s when Faith emerged from my head, not exactly, but pretty close, to out of the head of Zeus, Athena, where I grew up in northern New Jersey, and New York City was sort of in my backyard and very familiar with it. And I moved to New England for college in '65 and ended up staying here ever since. And so I wanted Faith to have this outsider perspective on New England. Also, she was the granddaughter of clergy. I wanted her, what I thought, kind of to be against type, but there really isn't a clerical spouse type, as I very quickly learned. But I wanted her to have a bit of an edge. She's very, very different from, I always say she's taller, but I mean, she is very different. I wanted to create a completely fictional character. I did give her a baby in that first book, and that was one of the only, most of the kids were either non-existent, they were divorced, they were with the dad, they were in boarding school. But I just thought at that point in that time, they would have had a baby, and it causes a lot of complications, to have, she can't just leave the house pursuing a clue and leave the kid alone in the crib. So but I like to read mysteries about food, going back to Rex Stout and things like Who's Killing the Great Chefs.
Yep.
Europe, I liked Virginia Rich. I liked food mysteries, and so I thought, okay, I'll make her a caterer. She's an amateur, she can get a foot in the door as that, clerical food. So there were kind of lots of these different threads, and I was there in France, of course, in one of the gastronomic capitals of the world, in Lyon, surrounded by food, and it just kind of all came together. And she really, I really like Madeleine L'Engle's description of writing, which is taking dictation from your imagination, and that's exactly how I felt sitting down at that typewriter. That was it.
Did you base her on any one person, or just kind of?
No, she's really, I think she's probably little bits and pieces of some people. I have one of my closest friends is married to a minister, and her name is Faith, and I've known her for a long time, but I just thought it would be interesting to have her name be Faith and have her be really chafing at the fishbowl existence that is many clerical families experience. And so that's what that came. But I wanted to give her, there's nothing remotely funny about murder, but I Michael just said, I like to read mysteries that had some humor in them. And so I thought, let's give people a break from the suspense and the mayhem. And Orel doesn't give us that, but but I thought, okay, she looks at the world in a bit askance, and I think maybe I do too. Maybe that's what we have in common.
That's good. Oline, I have to tell you my amazing coincidence.
Okay, I was just going to get to that, so go right ahead.
No, you weren't.
It's the next
I
question.
have been going to interrupt. I'm going to tell you my amazing coincidence.
Okay.
Just back from the Tucson Book Festival, which is a wonderful book festival. It's like 300 authors and 150,000 people come on the weekend in Tucson. It's really become my favorite book festival. Just before I went to Tucson, I read this thriller that's a huge bestseller called First Lie Wins. It's by Ashley Elston. It's huge. It's been on the Times list for weeks. It's part of Reese Witherspoon's book club. And I really enjoyed it. It's really skillful about a con woman, just a great mystery, really well written, very tricky. Just maybe the best book I've read this year as far as thrillers and mysteries go. And so I finished that just before I went to Tucson. I went to the festival and had a really good time. I knew I was in Arizona because a woman brought a snake to my book signing. Yeah, I knew I wasn't in New York, right? She had a snake on her wrist, and it had I was just happy I didn't have to sign it. So I do the book festival, I do my talk, and then I'm flying home. I get on the plane to fly home, and I sit down, and the woman next to me says, "Hi, I met you at Thriller Fest. I'm Ashley Elston." I said, "No, you can't be. I'm sorry, you can't be. I just finished. You cannot just finish a book and then sit next to the author." Right? You can't have the author sitting there when you just finished a book. That's impossible. Anyway, that's my big coincidence.
Okay.
You're not impressed?
I am.
I'm impressed.
I'm impressed.
Right? I finished her book and there she is.
There she is.
Yeah. We talked all the
Cosmic
way to
coincidence.
Dallas.
Yeah,
What?
I love it. Michaela, you talked a little bit about publishing a few minutes ago. What are some of the major changes that you have noticed since you've been in publishing?
Well, I think, of course, Amazon was the big game changer of all. And, the introduction of ebooks and online book selling, that was a major change. I also alluded to the era of mergers and acquisitions in which vertical publishing became the norm. Vertical meaning one publisher would publish all formats of a book, paperback, hardcover, and now ebook. When I started in publishing, the hardcover houses were separate from the paperback companies. And in retrospect, that makes perfect sense. And in my experience as an editor, I think it's great that I can acquire a book, I can be involved in the hardcover publication, simultaneous ebook, and then a year later, a paperback edition. What editor is going to know the book better at that point than the original acquiring editor? I think that we've seen an increase in diversity in publishing.
Oh, yeah.
Both in editors and in the publishing side, in terms of publishing staff. There's still some improvements made in that front, but it's certainly better than it was originally. Also, certainly more women are in positions of authority in publishing than they were when I entered the industry. And it's now very normal for women to dominate in just about every level of publishing. So I think that's great. In terms of the books that are published, well, of course, there are many more books being published now, and self-publishing has become a viable option and a very respectable one for a lot of authors. I think, what we see in publishing now is the blockbuster phenomenon in which a few authors dominate the bestseller lists and new authors have opportunities to get recognition. But what we call the mid-list authors really are struggling for their share of the market. So an author who's published 2 or 3 books or 4 or 5 that had modest sales is really going to have a hard time. And in that position, a lot of authors will choose to use a pseudonym and start over as a debut author, because there's more opportunities to showcase debut authors than there are for an author who's published books, but their career hasn't taken off. So I think in that respect, it's gotten harder for authors to kind of get past, I don't know, the booster rocket stage, and to continue to build their careers. But I think that one thing that hasn't changed is that people are committed to books. People who are book readers are still book readers. You can't take that away from them. The fans are there. The mystery genre is very strong, and there are mystery fans at every age level. And there is such a wide variety of interests inside the mystery genre. There are always new opportunities to branch out. And I always say to every author, write the book that only you can write. But at the same time, I say, well, write the book that you think there's an audience for. And with we know that mystery fans are always looking for an exciting new author to discover. They're very loyal to their favorites.
Oh, yeah.
But they're also minded toward new authors. And I think that's just great.
I do too. RL, your reach is beyond.
No one's ever called me RL in my life. I'm Bob.
Okay, Bob.
I think you have to live in Texas to be RL.
Okay.
Right? Everyone's walking around RL in Texas. Not
okay.
here.
Bob, you've got a big reach. A couple of weeks ago, my husband and I were at Best Buy, and I was talking to him about how excited I was about this upcoming interview. And I said, and R.L. Stine is one of the authors. This young clerk who was in her 20s was walking by. She says, R.L. Stine, I just finished his latest book. And she started telling me about how she started reading them when she was 7 years old. She was still reading them. She said 7 was probably too young, but it was okay with her parents. And she said one thing, the reason she loved your books is she said your books taught her how to dominate your fear, that you can be afraid, but know that you can control that fear. Now, how do you show children how to handle their fear?
Well, the books all have happy endings. That's all. They insist on it. They insist on a happy ending. So once, this is true. Once I wrote a Fear Street novel, teen novel, and just for fun for me, I gave it an unhappy ending. And the good girl is carried off as a murderer at the end. And the murderer completely gets away with it. Just for fun, something different for me. And the kids immediately turned on me. And I got mail immediately. R.L. Stine, you moron. How could you write that? Dear R.L. Stine, you're an idiot. How could you write that book? And that book haunted me. I would go do school visits and some kid would raise their hand. Why did you write that book? Why did you do that? Everywhere I went, they could not accept an unhappy ending. And he said, well, are you going to write a sequel to finish the story? And I had to do that. I wrote a sequel to give it a happy ending. And I never tried that again. I never did it again.
Okay. Happy endings. That's it.
Yes.
I'm wondering if Bob and Katherine, are any of your fictional creations based in part on real people or actual cases? Katherine, why don't you go first?
One book is actually based on my own life. I went to a meeting at the local library, which is just within walking distance of where we were living then. And when I came home, the kitchen door had been smashed in on our breezeway, and I knew immediately, daytime break, walked in, walked out immediately thinking could still be somebody there, ran to a neighbor's, and just the whole thing. We were completely cleaned out. My mother was Norwegian. There was Norwegian silver from my grandparents. The computer, at that time, it was not a laptop. It was one of the early Apples. I mean, you know, they knew what they were doing. They just took a pillowcase. They just dumped everything in. And that was that. Didn't touch the Legos in my son's room, you know, but that. And it engendered such rage in me. I thought, okay, it's a finite universe. Those things have to be somewhere. And I began doing what I then wrote the book about, which was I began immediately to look in dumpsters in the area to see if they had just dumped things. I began going to pawn shops in the area, in the Boston area and up into New Hampshire, saying, oh, I'm looking for a wedding present. You know, do you have any silver? And finally, one place, and they were some creepy places, you know, like you could see there, one guy had a gun under a stack of papers. He said, you should be going to these antique marts. And so I went to those, and lo and behold, at one of them, there was a case, and there was a lot of our things were there, in particular a bracelet my mother had made for me in Norway for my 16th thing. So, you know, so I said, oh, we love these things, you know, who is the dealer and so forth. So we ended up identifying the dealer. It was a retired school teacher who would hire and train and pay a certain amount house, you know, don't take the plate, just take the good stuff. And we, you know, showed the police, because I had photographs of things, and they said, well, you know, they got her in, she keeps bad records, but a thief can't transfer title. So everything that we bought, we ended up, after a lengthy thing, getting the money back. So in the book I wrote, you know, it had the body in the bookcase. There's a body. There were no dead bodies, but it's pretty much exactly what happened, including the fact that the cop who appeared when I called from the neighbor looked at my door and said, "Was it like this when you left?" I mean, the glass is smashed. It's got wood splintered. And so, you know, and again, and my friend and I, in disguise, went down to Brimfield, you know, because we'd heard she had a table there. Boston Magazine did an article. And the cops got a whole thing about her and what she did, and that she sold out of the Miami airport, and you know, but you know, she was never brought to justice. But we didn't get even a smidgen of what she took, but it just felt great. So that is autobiographical. All the rest is semi, in that it's got, you know, the way I look at life at times, but that's a true, Michaela, that's a true crime for you. That's my true crime book.
Bob, have you done any ever based on?
No, I never had a true crime. That's a horrible story.
It was horrible.
Terrible story.
It was.
No, nothing's real. I don't have anything real. Or real people. I guess my son's claim to fame is that he never read a Goosebumps book.
Yeah.
It's horrible. He was the right age. He just to make me crazy, right? You know, author's kid, they know how to get you. He would never read one. And so once I put him in a Fear Street novel, a vampire book, and it was all about him, Matt. It was Matt. He was the character, and he didn't read that one either. But I got back. No, he read only Garfield comics his whole childhood. That's all he read, Garfield. He had all the collections. He read Garfield. And then he went to college and he was an English major. So go figure, right? But I
Right.
got back at him in this book. It's a vampire book, and in the very last paragraph, he gets bit in the neck. So I did. I paid him back.
So there you go.
Yeah, yeah.
Micah, what do you look for in a new writer?
Well, I'm looking for a real commitment to writing. First of all, when people come to me and say, "Oh, I have a great idea for a book," I don't really consider that a commitment. A commitment means that you are writing. A writer is someone who sits down and writes. A lot of people like the idea of being a writer, but they don't want to write. They just think that it's going to happen to them. So I'm really looking for a strong commitment and a writer with a sense of who they are and what they want to accomplish with their book. And every book does not have to reinvent the wheel, but I'm always looking for something that I haven't seen before. And when you look at the mystery genre with the thousands of books that have been published over the centuries, each one is different. Each one has something new to offer, a new spin on the formula. And so I'm looking for something that I haven't seen before. And that's what makes me read beyond the first page. If I just feel like, oh my God, I've read this opening page 100 times, that's not too exciting. But I'm just looking for that spark of originality that sets one writer apart from so many others. And of course, good storytelling is the foremost thing that I look for. I grew up in a family where we were always telling stories, some true and some not so true, and embellishment was always encouraged. And so I love good storytelling. And I think that that's what readers look for also. It's just like, you know, when I would go to my parents and say, tell me a story, they always came up with something. And I want every writer that I am reading to just tell me a story, whether it's a true story or one that's made up. They're all good stories.
Do you like the Thursday Murder Club books?
I guess I should know them, but
I do. I
yes.
like
Come
Richard
on.
Osman. Richard Osman.
Richard Osman?
Yeah.
They're fun. They're fun.
These are, you'll love them. They're very entertaining and very clever. And the characters are wonderful. There are 3 of them now or 4?
Four.
Richard Osman.
Four.
4 of them. The second one is the best. The second one is amazing, but they're wonderfully entertaining. And I really recommend them to a lot of people. They're good. He's a British guy, and I think that he's stopped for a while. He's going to try some other series, but these Thursday Murder Club books are wonderful.
Oh, they're fun.
Especially as the sleuths are of a certain age. They're not youngsters. And
Well, they're all old, and
I like that.
old characters.
I like that.
I like that too. I like that too.
Yes.
For the 3 of you, is there anything you would not write about? And is there anything you would not publish?
Not me. I do anything.
You do anything.
Yeah, obviously.
Well,
I'm a kids author. There are a lot of things I don't write about.
yeah.
You know, especially in Goosebumps, I don't write about any real world things. There's nothing of the real world in Goosebumps. Like kids have to, the only way I can get away with scaring kids is to make sure they know it's a fantasy.
Yeah.
They have to know that what happens in these books could never really happen. And when I establish that, then I can go pretty far with the scares. But yeah, there isn't that much I can do. And of course, when you're writing for 10-year-olds, they don't know anything. They have no references. They have they know nothing. You can't refer to anything. Because, you know, if 10-year-olds, they were born when? 2014?
Yeah.
That's everything before that is like lost. It's ancient history to them. So that's also a problem.
I I would not, I am not comfortable in writing about putting children in danger or you know, the murder of a child or anything even approaching that. And the same with a serial killing, you know, that it didn't really interest, that's not something that grabbed me. I'm, you know, more the kind of puzzle mystery. A lot of blood does get spilled, and there are some pretty gruesome scenes in my books over time. But definitely I would say the business. And in the very first book, Faith is the murderer has locked Faith and her infant Benjamin in the basement preserves closet. And, you know, so there's that moment of, you know, is there enough air, you know, so she's been put in danger. And I did have, in those days, people would write you letters, which was nice. And I had a woman write to me and say, how could I have put the baby in danger? And I thought, well, what did, you know, that wasn't that kind of book, but it really hit home, and I've never done it since. That was just not the kind of book I wrote or wanted to write, and it had made her uncomfortable. And I thought, okay, you know, this is, no, I'm not going to do that.
Michael, is there anything you would not publish?
Oh, definitely a lot of things.
Besides bad books.
In my books, no animals must be harmed,
Okay.
or even threatened. And I think, you know, as publishers, we try to be sensitive, and we do not want to publish offensive material. And basically, they're not fun. At Kensington, we primarily publish entertainment, and any kind of offensive content is not entertainment. And so, you know, I kind of take my cues from net television. If something is okay on network television, I think it's probably okay to most people who read and buy books. There's a lot of content on cable and streaming services that I think is too much for most book readers to enjoy. So we never want to publish a book that seems to imply that violence is a good solution to a problem. I think that mysteries take place in a very moral universe, that a person who commits a serious crime, such as a murder, is going to be brought to justice. As Bob said, people like those happy endings. They really want to feel that a sense of justice has prevailed, even though something terrible has happened. So, yeah, I'm cautious, and I think most editors are. And I have to say, I get some queries which come in every day, dozens of them through email, and the books just sound so awful. I think, why would write that, much less want to read it? Some of them are quite good, but some of them are just so beyond the pale. It's amazing. So yes, we have a sensibility when we're deciding what books we're going to publish, and you know, we want books to make the world a better place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, people always ask me, do you get ideas? Do you get story ideas from kids? And I say, no way, you can't. Your kids' ideas are way too gruesome. They're all too gruesome for anything I could ever do. They all go so far beyond anything I would write. I've never had a decent idea from a kid, never.
We have a couple questions that have come in. One from it looks like a Robin, but it's for Bob. Robin is, I'm really enjoying reading 14 Days, and I look forward to seeing who wrote which character. Was it fun to be a part of this adventure?
Not at all. Robin,
Okay.
Robin, all you have to do is go to the back. It tells you who wrote what. The Authors Guild put out their very first anthology. It's 36 stories by 36 authors. And it's a wonderful short story book. They're wonderful people. And but they're tied together like into a novel. It's called 14 Days. And amazing stories. But they had this idea not to put the author's name with their stories. And the reader, it's a horrible idea. But I mean, I should I shouldn't be talking like this, but people, when you buy a short story book, what do? You look for your favorite authors and you read their stories, right? But here you can't do that. In the very back, they tell you which author wrote. You're supposed to guess which author wrote what. But there's 36 different authors. You can't guess. So, Robin, go to the back. Look it up. You'll see.
We have a question for Michael, I'm sorry. Any current themes, trends you like these days, or any that are fading or overdone? And I think you could also include true crime in that.
Well, you should hear our editorial meetings where we're asking that same question week after week. What's happening? What's working? What do people like? What can we anticipate going forward? It's nobody has a crystal ball. And when we're looking at the books that we're acquiring, we know that we're going to publish them in a year to 18 months or maybe further in the future. So how are we supposed to know what's going to be trendy at such a distant, pub date? It's really hard. So, we look for things that we think we can count on, and publishing is as much of an art as a science. I think good writing will always prevail. Maybe I'm an optimist, but I think that good writing is the key to everything. And editors don't go into publishing because they want to publish lousy books. Every editor is looking for good writing, and we may have differences of opinion as to what good writing is, and we all have different favorite books in different genres. Right now at Kensington, the cozy mysteries are really prevailing. They are just rocking the world. The fans are very ardent. They support their favorite authors, and they're open to new ones. And it's a lot of fun to work on them, and the covers are so cute. But I can't say that there's any one trend that we are specifically pinpointing right now. Publishing has to have books for everyone, and not everyone will agree on what's their favorite. So at the same time that we're saying, well, okay, cozies are really on top right now, they won't always be. And traditional mysteries need to be cultivated, and we need to be ready when that trend changes in the future. So it is a great question, and I don't think I have an answer.
Okay. We have a question for Bob, and I think there's a couple other people interested in. Do you use your dummy behind you?
Use it. It haunts me. I don't use it.
Do you ever use it like,
the dummy was made for the Goosebumps TV show, the original series. I used to do introductions to the primetime shows, and I did an act with the dummy. He was actually much better than me. But and then after the show, they gave him to me. So he's sitting there. He used to look older than me. Now he doesn't. I don't know how that happened. Something weird happened.
I have a question for everyone. And Katherine, start with you. Does it ever get easier to write?
No, it gets much harder. For me, especially, I've written 350 books. There are no stories left. I've done everything. I've done everything a human can write. And seriously, it gets much harder and harder to come up with plot and not to repeat myself.
Yeah, no, I don't think it ever does get easier, and maybe that's a caution. I think I become harder on myself. I think that's one of the reasons why it doesn't get any easier. So yes, it doesn't. But I love it. I mean, I've always loved to write, although I wasn't turning out things when I was quite that young, although I did write these little stories for my sister when I was probably about 9 or 10. But I really love to write, but it is very hard work.
No, don't say that.
I'm sorry, it
No,
is.
sorry.
Sorry,
Oh, I
Bob.
hate it. I'm on these author panels, and someone always says, writing is so hard. Writing is hard. I have to lock the kids in the garage so I have time to write. Writing's not hard. You don't need special shoes. You don't need, there's no heavy lifting. You're indoors. It's fun. You're creating. You're writing. Don't say it's hard. I've never thought of writing as hard.
I
And
guess maybe
that's my
it's
only
a
advice
question
to
of
writers
time.
is
Yeah.
don't think of writing as hard, because then it will be.
All right, all right.
Well,
I'm going to have to adjust my attitude now.
No, you can't. Oh, the other thing I hate, these authors who go into schools and say, write what you know, write from your heart,
No,
write from your
that's,
heart.
I
Those kids will
disagree
never
with that.
write
Write
another
what you
word.
don't know. Write what you
I've
don't know.
written 350 books, not a single word from my heart. Not one. It's the truth.
on that note, we're actually out of time. And I want to thank you all for coming, the audience, Katherine, Bob, Michaela, thank you all. Please join us tomorrow, Wednesday, April 3rd at 7 p.m. for the paper nominees for the paperback original. And the panels are at mysterywriters.org for all of the ones that are coming up. And also information about the Edgar Awards is there too. I want to thank you all. This has been a lot of fun. I had a great time. Bob, Katherine, Michael, I appreciate this so much. And, I'll be seeing you all soon, I hope. So good night to everyone. Thank you. Buy books, buy a lot of books. Keep reading.
And keep writing.
And keep writing.